This week on the Walk On podcast.
We recognize that over 90% of people who buy non-alcs also buy alcohol in the same basket.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's people are not either or right now. I think what's happening in the culture is people are just questioning their relationship with alcohol. Should I have that extra drink, or do I move to an NA after I have 2 glasses of wine at dinner? Do I open another bottle, or do I simply sit down and have an NA and watch Netflix or whatever? So that you end your night, but you still feel kind of satisfied, but you're not waking up in the morning unproductive. You can move on with your life and still, be the person you want to be, fully.
I can't believe you didn't notice the 1,000 times.
Well, hello and welcome to the Walk On podcast. This is the continued journey of finding one's passion and purpose. Just as a brief background and reminder, if you're new here, I started this journey a couple years ago, really trying to figure out what was, I was going to say, the back half of my journey. I've said that before, and I reminded as I say that it's not a half, it's much less than a half, but I'm trying to figure out what's next for me. How do I find passion every day? Was reading a lot of books, watching a lot of podcasts, and realized, some of my most favorite memories are serving as a media spokesperson, doing radio interviews, and so podcasting dovetailed perfectly. And here we are. So we're along in the journey. This is season 3. I'm thrilled to welcome Declan Duggan today, Senior Vice President of Sales at BERO, a new NA beer. You're going to love to hear about this story. But Declan is a multi-hyphenate. He's going to tell you a bit more about himself in a second, but he's a beverage company board member, podcast host, nonprofit board member, entrepreneur, and he's been in the beverage industry a long time, starting with my personal favorite, working at Guinness. So Declan, welcome on.
Hey, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here. I really appreciate being on the show.
And I should also say that we're friends. I've known you for quite a number of years, and it's nice to see you in this venue.
Yes, indeed. It's great to see a friendly face at the other end of the microphone, for sure.
For sure. Well, why don't you go ahead and give us a little more background about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm originally from Ireland, grew up there, went to high school there, and then decided to, leave there in the early 90s. For the big smoke, which was London at the time, our closest New York, I guess, or LA, and loved it there. Spent a couple of years, almost 3 years there as a salesperson working for a company that dealt with labor and trades, where we were kind of basically selling labor and trades to different various businesses across the UK. And it was a great intro into sales. I mean, it was really fun because I worked with the 2 guys that really grew a massive business. Now I think they're publicly traded in the UK, O'Neill and Brennan Construction. They were great guys, and we were literally in a 10 by 10 room. So I learned so much about starting a business, just listening to these guys having the tough conversations every day and trying to figure out where the next check was coming from. That I got the bug, I think, there for growing a small business and seeing the passion that it took to do that, and honestly, the perseverance that it took to do that. So I kind of shelved that, put it in the back of my mind, and then decided to move to the US because I just wanted to try something different right before I got a little too older. So I moved over to the US. I had a good friend who lived in Philly at the time. This is really going to date me, but
that's all right.
Yeah, he was. His name was Lawrence.
It's a safe space here.
Yeah, he was Lawrence, the Irish for Lawrence, but he lived in Philly at the time, and he was the IT guy for a print photo lab. So, we are going back a few days here, but he was my connection here. So moved over here, started working in the bar restaurant business, ended up managing, 2 of the bigger Irish pubs in Philadelphia, Fergie's and the Plough and the Stars. And as a result, all the Guinness guys, were stopping in every few days, checking it because we're some of their top accounts. They were checking in, trying to run promotions, trying to get more signage up, doing this, that, and the other. And, eventually, after getting to know all these guys, they were like, hey, you seem like a bright guy. I mean, maybe you could jump the counter and join us. And I was like, sure, let's do it. And I was just a year married at the time. Thankfully, we've made it to 25 now.
Congrats.
Thank you. Just this past year. So as I keep telling her, if she killed me when she met me, she'd be out by now. But, so we were both working different jobs. She was working in a finance role up at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. I was coming home at 4, so it just wasn't going to work.
Not seeing each other.
Yeah. So it was time to change. So I jumped the fence, joined, at the time was Guinness Import Company, became Guinness Bass, became Guinness UDV, eventually became Diageo. So I made it through a number of those changes in the business. So I ended up working for Diageo for, I guess, almost 10 years. And it was fantastic training. I mean, what a great multinational company, wonderful brands. They ended up being like the behemoth really in the adult beverage business. But, felt like a number after about 7 or 8 years. The more this thing got bigger, the less influence I felt in the business and the less I liked it, frankly. And I think I ended up staying a couple of years longer than I would have, really based on the training schedules that they put in front of us. So every 3 months, I'd see this new training ahead and I'd be like, wow, that looks really cool. I'm going to stick around for that. And I did that for about 2 years. And then, I was like, you know what? I'm just kidding myself. I'm not happy.
Yeah.
I like the trainings, but that's the only thing keeping me here. So I wanted to, just spread my wings and do something different. So I ended up doing a few other things, like moving into sweet leaf tea, which eventually got sold to Nestle, and then moved from this tea business, which was really a startup out of Austin with David Smith and Clayton Christopher. David went on to do high brew coffee, which I then joined and spent 4 years with them. Clayton went on to do Deep Eddy vodka, which he, grew and sold. And then in between, I kind of co-founded another business with a friend of mine called PourMyBeer.com, where it was kind of a beverage tech venture where we created tables, walls, etc., where consumers could go up and pour their own beer, wine, spirits, whatever was going through a pressurized line. We could measure it and monitor it and give that information back, and it cut down on theft and waste and, even staff costs in some states where, staff costs were becoming particularly high at the time, like California. It made sense, right? So after that, I went back into that coffee business, high brew coffee, for 4 years, like I said, with David. And then I got a call from a guy called John Herman, who was the chief commercial officer at the time at Nutrabolt, the parent brand for C4 Energy. And so I get this call, hi, my name's John Herman, I'm with Nutrabolt. I was like, Nutrabolt, the blender company? Like, what the hell's a blender company calling me for? So after we got through that communication snafu, I got to understand, who they were. Of course, I knew what C4 Energy was. I'd heard and seen it on shelves before. But then he had said, look, we're trying to start an energy drink company. We have equity in our brand name. We have funding. Clearly we're one of the biggest sports nutrition companies in the world. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. This is not like what I had done prior. Like, it's not
total different direction for you.
It's a big company, Diageo, it's not startup where you're looking over your shoulder every 6 months to see if you've got enough money in the coffers to keep going, which brings its own stress.
Sure.
But then, here's something where, this is the taking of all of your know-how, and basically here's the money to go do it. And by the way, here's also some brand equity that you can leverage. And I was like, this sounds really cool. So I jumped in with another guy called Pat Graney, and we ran, east and west of the country respectively. And Pat retired after 2 years, so I ended up picking up the rest of the country and basically ran, the C4 business from 2018 to March of last year, really 24, when I left to join this company, BERO, now headed up by John Herman. Same John Herman
Funny
that
how
hired
that
me.
works.
Yeah. It's a really small pond that we swim in this business. But, I think, another good friend as well, Greg Moran, that, this happens over and over again in the business when you know and trust some people. It feels really easy to just bring those people with you, and you have immediate trust, and they work hard, and you're just a good team. So it's really easy to kind of just put that old suit on and go for it again.
Go back.
Yeah.
Well, that's thanks for sharing that narrative, and I want to dive into your company in a second, but I want to go back to that really interesting experience and watching that trajectory of the companies you've been through. And as you mentioned, our mutual friend, Greg Moran, watching his experience in it. What is that like, putting on a different jersey in a startup? What is that feeling like when you're like, yeah, I want to go do this?
Yeah. I mean, it's, well, I think, there's a couple of ways you could look at that, right? Like, there's people do it for different reasons. Some people just do it because they need the job, right? Like, and if you're doing it for the money, then I would say that's a little more difficult pulling on that jersey every morning,
Yeah.
I think, for the reasons that I joined most of these companies, I joined them out of a sense of passion for the category, and for a sense of what could be, right? Like, it's that promise, when you're looking at, like, so for example, I'll just, when I was looking at sweet leaf tea, this was an organic tea in a glass bottle with a cartoon grandma on the front. Like, this had never been done
Yeah.
before. Like, it was kind of more,
Yeah.
what was out there was very stodgy, very serious teas like Honest Tea and Tao. And, they were very serious about the tea. This kind of played a little bit more like fun, where, we had a different style. We had, granny-isms that we had under each cap. So when you open the cap, she would say different things, just like your granny would say to you, like,
Sure.
wear clean underwear when you go out a day, every morning, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was like just silly stuff your grandma would tell you. But, to have those as part of the brand made it seem like it was a lot more fun, and we were reaching a different type of consumer. So that to me
Yeah.
was exciting. Like, we had a place that we could go that others could not. Right. And I would say that, into the bargain, we also had, I would say the same thing was probably true of high brew coffee. When we got to high brew coffee at the time, when you're looking at the category, it's Starbucks and it's Dunkin' Donuts, and they're 90% of the category. And you're like, wow, we can go and be giant killers here. Like, we can go and upend this category and do something different and come out with the first shelf stable cold brew coffee in a can and really make some noise. And that's the stuff that got me jazzed about getting into and putting that jersey on every morning. Was we're doing something that's a bit more history making than it is just, hey, we're coming out with another brand.
Yeah, so it sounds like what I'm hearing is there is this sense of being an outsider, or, sort of challenging. I'm thinking of guerrilla marketing, but, really challenging these big brands and being an underdog.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think that's where the excitement comes from, is the possibility of what you can do, right? Looking at a Starbucks and a Dunkin' Donuts, you're thinking, wow, if we could take 5% of that category, like, that is a massive number, first of all. But second of all, it's also about breaking the norm, right? Like, where, the part of this is about, most of the brands that I've worked for are, since leaving Diageo have been, better for you brands. Honestly, I mean, the tea was a really good tea, and we only used, organic sugar. Same thing was true at high brew coffee, low cal. Like, so everything we were kind of doing was more on the trend of better for you. So we were doing that before better for you was kind of a catch call, and I think, I could sense, and I'm sure others could sense, that eventually everything is going to go that way. And you can clearly see that that's really the norm now, although, we still have an awful lot of high fructose corn syrup and other fun stuff out there. I think, eventually, if enough companies come at these categories the way we were trying to do, somebody's going to topple these giants, and they're going to come out with better for you products that make sense for these consumers and will change, habits, diet, and hopefully health, into the bargain down the line.
I think that's really fascinating. As you were saying that, I'm thinking about some of these other giant categories, and direct to consumer has played a role in changing some of that. So I'm thinking of, sneaker categories where it was Nike and Adidas owned running shoes. And now there's all these, shoes that you've never heard of that all of a sudden within a short period of time have gone to market. And it's in large measure because of this outsider, better for you. I'm a runner. I created a shoe that I wanted. And it sort of, on some levels, some of these shoes like Haka and others, it's sort of like these people were back to Phil Knight's roots, where Phil Knight just wanted a better running shoe. And then it became this big thing. And now they're like, no, we've got the better running shoe. So is it harder in your industry where it's much less direct to consumer? Is direct to consumer becoming more of a thing?
I think it was actually harder for brands before direct to consumer, because you have, in many ways, the distribution networks that are there, they're great people, they're great businesses, but they're also the choke point for brands to get into the market, where if you can't get into a distribution system that can get you to the shelf, then how do you get to the shelf, right? Like, that's the difficulty. So direct to consumer has allowed for two things, I think, that, that are very different now. One is it does give oxygen to small brands that can prove that they're worthy and say, look, even in a microcosm of this size market, I've done X amount, right? So therefore, give me a shot. So maybe that local distributor takes a look at that and goes, wow, okay, yeah, I have seen this happen in my market. I will give these guys a chance. And then now you're in the swimming pool that is the distribution game. And, they all talk. And if your brand does reasonably well and, you're decent people to work with, then they'll help in that endeavor to try and get you into others that are more contiguous and local as you start to scale out. The other thing that I think D2C allows for, which we've certainly used to our benefit, is making sure that you have the right product, right, before you go broad distribution. So, for example, with BERO, we launched on October 16th, we launched our direct-to-consumer website. Prior to that, we didn't have a website, we didn't have social media handles, we didn't have anything. So for all intents and purposes, people didn't know we existed, other than the retailers and the distributors we'd been privately talking to and asking them to keep the powder dry on the news that Tom was involved so we could have a, kind of full-scale launch. But what that gap between the 16th and let's say the 29th of December, when we went into almost 1,400 targets across the country on end caps, allowed us to sell to that consumer and really test, did we get this right? So we got all the feedback from these consumers, like on the brand and the flavors and the packaging. And it gave us 2 months of a read, Michael, that was just invaluable. Because what if we got it wrong? What if we were sitting amongst ourselves going, God, we've got the greatest tasting NA beer in the world, and it tasted like what? Like, that's the point at which you can be really honest with yourself, because the feedback coming from consumers is unsolicited in most cases, right? Like, they just come back with that feedback and you go, this is the best tasting NA I've ever had. And if that's what you're getting consistently across all three flavors, you're in good shape. So you don't need to go back and retool before you launch at a Target, for example, and put yourself out there in a bigger arena where now if your product wasn't right, you've got an even bigger problem on your hands, right? Like where you might have a recall issue, So it's massively helpful, I think, for brands to seed and get that like foothold in the market and prove that they're worthwhile, and B, know that what you do have is good enough and you haven't effed it up,
Yeah, the dynamics of, that's how so why don't we pivot and talk about your current brand and your current role if you want. And the big question I'd like to ask is, what is it about this current role and company that excites you? But prior to that, I'm thinking about the rollout, right? And you just said the role of social media. I follow Tom Holland a little bit. I actually don't think I follow him on Instagram, on the gram, but I follow, I think he was on Jimmy Fallon. Yep. And I know of his journey because I've seen you mention Graham Norton in a previous conversation, some other things where he's talked about his journey to sobriety and what that meant. And all of a sudden, he's just kind of casually talking, and he's like, "Oh yeah," as he's explaining his journey, he's like, "Oh yeah, Jimmy, and I've created a new product." And it was just sort of like, I guess, in his way, just very understated. And so as you're talking about this brand and marketing approach, he was so understated about it, and it was just he wanted, and I want to talk a little bit more about his journey if you're up for it. But anyway, it was just this feedback from social media. That's how I found it. And all of a sudden, funny, 3 days later, you announced your new role at the company. So it was really this interesting use of social media, and I guess that's of his generation, to really bring a brand to market pretty quickly. So why don't you tell us about the brand and what excites you about this new role?
Yeah, I mean, again, back to what I was saying earlier, it's about like it's really on trend, right? It's on the health trend. This is where I love to be, it's like, what's new, what's next? How can we really take over a category? How can we differentiate in a category and really become meaningful? Like that was, I've been looking at this category honestly since 2020. So what happened was I had the good fortune to be able to speak at the National Beer Wholesalers Association meeting in Las Vegas back then. And I was speaking with a guy called Jerry Kermouche, who's the editor of Beverage Business Insights, which is a subscription service for, retailers, distributors, anybody in the business. And it's a great publication if you want to just keep up on what's happening in the industry and what's going to happen, because they generally have the news before most others. So I'm up there, and what I was up there to do was really to espouse that beer distributors needed to think about being more beverage distributors, not just beer, right? Because the signs at the time were that domestic beer had been in decline for some years. Craft was kind of in arrest, and the only really, bright spot on the horizon at the time was White Claw, which then of course boomed like a number of like hundreds of other seltzers and Me Too kind of brands, right? And it was clear, like at the time when I was on stage talking about this, I didn't want to be completely self-serving and only talk about C4, right? Like, as I was 2 years into the C4 journey, and clearly I was trying to pick up distributors for that brand. But what I did was I called my brother, Johnny, who lives in Galway, Ireland still, and he owns a pub and a restaurant over there in our hometown. And so anyway, I called him up and I was like, look, what are you seeing over there? I'm speaking at this engagement in Vegas in a few weeks, and I need to talk about trends in the business. And I want to see what's going on over there, because typically there's something going on that we don't know about, right? So he said, well, I'll tell you one. He said, I'm selling as many 12-ounce bottles of Heineken Zero right now as I am of Heineken. And I was completely floored, because Athletic Brewing were barely out of the gates over here, maybe a year and a half, 2 years.
Right.
Nobody was really taking the category seriously. When you talk to them, they were like, who'd drink a beer without beer in it? Like kind of, that was the approach.
Yeah.
And, I know Bill Schufelt over there was finding it difficult. Their CEO was finding it difficult to get funding. He was finding it difficult to get people to take it seriously for the first year and a half. But he kept going, God bless him, and created, the category that it is today. But really, I think what dawned on me afterwards was that this was probably going to continue, because I spoke to somebody else who was running the Estrella business in Spain, Michael, right? And this was the one where I was like, okay, one thing in the west of Ireland, they've got a lower blood alcohol content. It's half of what we have here. It's 0.04. So either you drink or you drive. So I was like, maybe that's what's driving it, is just people are cognizant of that. So when I spoke to this guy in Spain, he told me that their cafes in Barcelona for Estrella at the time usually had 3 beer lines. It was Estrella Damm, Estrella Light, and Estrella Non-Alc. And 24% of all their draft was coming from their non-alc tap in 2020. So that was my aha moment, where I'm like, wow, this category is going to be huge, and it's going to come to the US. And the way I always look at the US when it comes to malt trends or beer trends is we're 50 countries. We are, because we've got 50 different states. We've got 50 different LCBs and ABCs to get through. It is a daunting and a very expensive proposition to launch a brand in the US to try and make it a national brand. It is, incredibly so. And for most people, they completely underestimate that, right? So they either fail before they get there and underestimate how much time and energy and cost it's going to take, or they just don't have really what it takes to do a national approach, to be able to sweep a country very quickly, almost like, hopefully what we've done with the likes of a Tom, So being able to deploy that quickly so that the news gets out there, that you can get into a couple of quick national retailers, put yourself on the map, and then build your distribution around those accounts, because you're clearly showing great sales and you're showing a bandwidth to go national, then you start to attract that sort of attention to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I guess my interest in it began, was really back in 2020. And then when the opportunity arose, John Herman was leaving after we sold a portion of Nutrabolt to KDP, almost 30%. John had kind of had it. He'd been there for 8 years. We'd run hard, and he wanted to take a break and think about what he wanted to do. He found himself looking at the non-alc space, and, when we talked, I was like, wow, that's really fortuitous. I mean, that's kind of something I've wanted to get into as well. So at this point, he had spoken with Imaginary Ventures, who are a VC company out of New York. They had also kind of at the same time been talking to Tom's team, who were coming at it from the UK, going, hey, Tom wants to launch an NA beer brand. Do you know anybody in the space? And they're like, we just met with this guy, John Herman. He's looking for money for, to start this up. Let's put those two in a room. They met in a pub in New York, and for the first meeting, they hit it off immediately. And, just over a year ago, then the company was born. And I decided not to leave Nutrabolt and join until we had a product that was ready to sell, or I'd be just sitting over there burning cash, for a nascent company. I was like, look, when we have a product, I'll consider coming over, but I want to see what it is, and I want to see what the plan is. And if I like it, I'll jump on board and we'll go do this one more time. And that's basically what happened. And I joined in like the end of May of last year. And, we're 9 months into it or something at this point, and we're doing quite well.
Well, there are 3 threads I kind of want to pull on. One is I found it really fascinating, just you were talking about where the beverages are heading and sort of NA. And, I live in New York State where, cannabis is legal. And I walked into a gas station the other day, and and it's one that's known for like a good beer cave. And the whole front window was THC CBD beverages. And I was just like, wow, like it's, there are dispensaries here and you can go and legally buy products and they sell beverages. But it was just very jarring to me that just that quickly, really in a year since the market has opened and really matured here just in a year. Here's a whole new category in a gas station.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild, and I'm sure that's Delta 9 is the, is the genesis of that, I'm sure, right? Like, so there's a ton of Delta 9 drinks out there right now. It really is a bit of the Wild West. I know quite a few people in that business, and, I get it. I get that it's kind of frontier land, and, but for I was in this, I would potentially probably look at something like that. But what I don't like about that is it just feels like something that could be regulated out of business as quickly as it's been regulated in.
Interesting.
I'm sure that all these companies have a Delta 10 and a Delta 11 ready to go when Delta 9 gets, turned away, and they can just retool and come back out and, keep going. But it just feels like it's a bit early on that for me. And it's just not, it's not necessarily the business I would want to be in. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think if people, however people get their jollies is up to them, right? Like, and if it's what I am concerned with is the flood of brands that have come in, and how do you manage and maintain, the quality that's going to a consumer, when people are out there making, these brands, any which way they can. I'm quite sure there's a regulatory body that is doing all that, but I'm wondering if they have the capability to keep up with the amount that's going on, because it's almost like a joke when I talk to distributors every week, that I'm trying to, bring aboard, because our category is getting busy, right? But it's not anything close to, what this Delta 9 category is. And I say to most distributors, I'm saying, look, if, I know you've got choices to make because you have a finite amount of real estate in your warehouse, and every brand that you have takes up, X number of pallet positions, and they're finite, right? So their job is to find the brands that are going to be the most productive. They're going to produce the most productivity off of the least amount of real estate, right, in their warehouse. So our job is to convince them that we're that brand, right? So I often say to these guys, look, I know if I'm an NA beer guy called knocking on your door, there's at least 2 or 3 more of me a week, and there's at least 10 Delta 9 guys, and they all laugh because it's true. So,
well, that's another thread I want to pivot back to is, I thought it was really, I've had the good fortune the last couple of years of spending a lot of time in your home country. And it was really interesting. About 2 years ago, first time I'd been there in a couple of years, I was in Ireland, and I saw the Guinness Zero. And I'd actually seen it here around St. Patrick's Day. And I was like, oh, so this is, the U.S., they're getting the U.S. production up. This is one of their seasonal or specialty things, and it's just going to go away after St. Patrick's Day. And I saw it in Ireland, and it was not very popular, and I got a sort of couple of side-eye looks when I asked about it in pubs. And then fast forward, last August, so 2 years after really starting to spend a lot of time in Ireland, it was on every tap in, Guinness Zero was on every tap in every pub, and it was being poured. And I don't know the exact data, but I had a casual conversation with someone who said it's like a third. So to me, I thought that was really fascinating, the maturity of the category that quickly, that in a Guinness-centric community, in a place where beer is part of the culture, and that's the last thread I want to pull on, is so important that all of a sudden NA was such a huge impact, seemingly to me, overnight.
Yeah. Oh no, there's no doubt that it's become a very big piece of business for Diageo and Diageo Ireland particularly. It's certainly making its inroads here in every distributor that I talk to. First of all, Guinness is on a jag at the moment, because that whole split the G movement that they started, whether they started it or a consumer did, I don't care who takes credit for it, but it's great. Like it's like the Guinness toast, or
for the non-Irish and the non-beverage professionals, can you explain what split the G is for folks?
Sure. Yeah. So when you pour a pint of Guinness into the appropriate glass, their 20-ounce tulip, it's got the Guinness logo emblazoned on one side. And the idea is that when you wait for this thing to settle and then you pick up your pint, that you attempt to drink enough so that when you leave it back down, that the bottom of the head splits right through the middle of the logo. which is absolutely genius when you consider it, because about a third of the pint is gone on your first swig.
Yeah.
So it does promote a little more velocity. And honestly, sometimes, especially when especially in other countries where it may not be as fresh as you would find in Ireland, then, when you drink it a little faster, it just looks better, throughout the life of the pint, rather than that, yellow, nasty looking head that it gets sometimes when it's been sitting around for 20 minutes. Yeah. So I think it's a great ploy. I don't know how they did it, but whoever did it, hats off to them. But I think it's a great way to get people back into the franchise. But then the zero portion of that is huge. I mean, first of all, it's about flavor. Like at the end of the day, if you don't nail the taste, it doesn't matter what the hell you call it. People just won't drink it a second time. So I think what they did was incredibly smart. It is about as close to the real thing as you can get. And I've tried a number of them. There is a bit missing there, there's no doubt about it. But after you have the first one, I don't think you really notice anymore. If you're in a crowd and you're having more than one, you're fine with it. And I think there's a bit of this that's psychosomatic for people too, right? Like, let's be honest. I mean, if I'm in a crowd of people and I'm not drinking and I walk into a bar, you've got this kind of nervous energy where you're like, oh God, I don't know if I want to be here or not. Yeah. I'm not drinking. But once you get that first beer, whether it's an NA or not, now all of a sudden it's in your hand and you have a sip, you're like, I'm drinking a beer. You've just told yourself mentally. So now all of a sudden you seem to just relax and you're part of the crowd, right? So that just kind of dissipates any anxiety or, should I be here kind of moments go away, and all of a sudden people start to feel a bit more relaxed. So I think the closer these things look, taste and feel to the real thing, the quicker that happens for people, which, removes all those triggers to leave. And I think that's really important. I think, what some of the on-premise owners and retailers, Michael, are their traffic is down across the country, not just this country, every country. And I think some of that is because, they haven't been offering really good non-alc choices. So, you've got a consumer here that's on the upswing with 36% of Gen Z saying that they're not going to drink, but then they walk into a pub and nothing's changed, right? Yeah. So they can't get really good non-alc offerings. They might have one or two, but they don't have a bunch. So now all of a sudden they don't feel comfortable, but now they're the decision maker for 8-10 people walking in the door. Well, guess what? Yeah. They're probably going somewhere else. Yep. So I think it's important for bar owners and restaurateurs to really get into this and get ahead of this curve a little bit as well, because if they're not, they're going to continue to lose traffic.
It's really funny. We were talking a bit before, but as you were sharing some of that about, pub culture and people feeling uncomfortable. And I've done that too. I think of like work trips where I'm like, I know this group is going to get a bit rowdy and I really don't want to do that tonight. And I'm like, I've literally had this conversation in my head. I'm like, can I get a club soda and have them put a lime in it? And they'll think it's a gin and tonic or a vodka tonic. Yep. And that's just really an uncomfortable place to be. And as you were talking about pub culture, I was thinking, I saw this interview with Noel Gallagher, who he's like, people ask me to go out for a pint. And I'm like, nah, man, I don't want a pint. And they're like, come on and hang out. And he's like, who wants a pint? I want, an effing 100. Like, nobody wants one. Like, what are we going to talk about? Oh, good, mate, your dog's fine. And then I'm going to go home. He's like, piss off. Like, I want, let's go out and have a night. And I think there is, I think this category, particularly as you mentioned, the trends of younger people not wanting to drink. I think you maybe have caught the tiger by the tail.
Yeah, and I think there's another piece to that which you kind of touched on earlier on with your gas station analogy, is like they're getting their jollies and from somewhere else, right? So you can't you can't take a 10 milligram THC gummy and then go out and drink for the night, or you're going to be a puddle in the corner, right? Like so, right. So it's either one or the other in a lot of cases, and I think if you're doing one, it's also a disposable income thing, right? Like so, I'm spending money on one, I can't spend it on all. Like I'm 19 years of age or 20 years of age or 21, you can't, you don't have the disposable income to do everything, right? So it takes away from that. It takes away from the moment as well, because, maybe going out and having a gummy and being in public with people in a bar is not the best thing for people to enjoy themselves either, right? So there's all these kind of things that are trading against one another here. And you just have to provide, options for people that I think are reasonably healthy and that are affordable and that are on trend for what it is that they're looking for. And I think if you do all of that, then you have a chance. You have a chance that you're going to get picked up.
Yeah. Well, a couple more questions. I appreciate your time. I think my listeners, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask what it's like, and we talked a little bit about this offline, but what is it like working for a celebrity brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we're very fortunate. I mean, and Tom is just, Tom is, what you see is what you get. He's just a really good
And
human.
Declan, for our listeners who may not know, Tom Holland's Spider-Man and
Yeah.
a lot of other films, a pretty big movie star.
Yeah, I mean, he's an A-lister at this point. I mean, his stock has been on the rise for years. He's going to be shooting another Spider-Man movie next year. He's shooting another movie in February in the UK as well. So he's a busy guy. But I will say this, like, he's just, as he is in interviews, he is in real life. He's just a super nice human being. His family are involved in his business, which I love to see. His brothers help out. His mom and dad were there in New York when we were up there in October for the launch. We got to meet them. They're just a super bunch of people, and I think it's a testament to him that he brings his friends and family along on the ride, and they all have a role in maintaining Tom, as a normal person, which I think doesn't necessarily happen if you unhitch your wagon from your family and friends. I think a lot of the time you can end up in the whole entourage society where things change and you become a different person. So I think he's been very smart about that, and working with and for Tom is great. I mean, like, he brings a whole lot to the party, and if we ask him to do something, he'll generally, his biggest question usually is, how important is this? And if we say it's really important, I'll find time to do it. So he's that kind of person.
And you one of the differences we talked about offline is that, sometimes it's just I'm putting my face on a package, but for him, there was real purpose and value behind this product.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was about a lifestyle thing for him. But then he also recognized, well, I can't be the only one doing this. Like, I mean, there's got to be loads of other people out here like me who are taking a sobriety journey, but still, maybe it's not forced sobriety, like where you end up in rehab or something, but it's he's doing it for a reason, right? Like, he's doing it because he thinks maybe he's drinking too much, right? And maybe he's just getting a handle on himself. So in doing so, he's like, I still want to be able to, reach back and do those moments we talked about earlier, which is, go to the pub and have something there for me that I feel includes me in the crowd and I'm proud of as a brand owner that I'm bringing to people. Like, that's really what it boils down to for him, is like, I want to be able to make people feel included in the journey here, whether they're drinking or not. And look, we're not proselytizing sobriety. We're not that brand. We recognize that the over 90% of people who buy non-alcs also buy alcohol in the same, basket.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's people are not either or right now. It's really about, like, I think what's happening in the culture is people are just questioning their relationship with alcohol. Like, do I need to drink as much? Should I have that extra drink? Or do I move to an NA after I have 2 glasses of wine at dinner? Do I open another bottle, or do I simply sit down and have an NA and watch Netflix or whatever? You know what I mean? It's so that you end your night, but you still feel kind of satisfied, but you're not waking up in the morning unproductive. You can move on with your life and still, be the person you want to be, fully, and embrace, what's in front of you.
Well, 2 last questions. I appreciate you. As an observer of your work and your experience in your industry, it really seems like your industry values and relies on teams. So how do you mold and manage a team, to get the best out of them? You're launching this new brand, you're full tilt. How do you get that team in the right place?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier on, Michael. It's like getting that core team around you, like that executive leadership team at the beginning needs to be unassailable. They need to be best in class citizens, you know what I mean, at their job, at where they are in their home life, like just really good people that want to get this done and have the same passion that you have to do the job. And then it's about trusting all those people to hire the right people, because at the end of the day, we are the nucleus for the culture, right? So if we trust one another to go get this done, then we trust that they're going to hire the right people to bring into the organization to continue to expand that sense of wanting to be here and wanting to get the job done and wanting to work together to do it. So that nucleus is super important. I think you bolt onto that nucleus with the trust and the people that you bring, that you have in the past, like we've talked about earlier, where there are people out there that can do some of these roles that you need, that are critical right away. And their capabilities to hire below them because you've seen it before. So it's that trust of bringing in the right people so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. And when you're in a category that's extrapolating really quickly, you need to be able to do that at pace. So you can't sit down and take 3 months to hire somebody sometimes. You need to be able to do it like, we're further ahead. We're 3 times ahead of where we thought we'd be 2 months into this now. So, we've accelerated our timeline essentially to hire people because we're just floundering, with all the work we have to do. So we need to bring in people to help. And that's happening faster. So we can't now sit back and evaluate people for 3 months. We need to go, okay, who's the best we ever had at this? Let's go find them and see if they'll come. And I think that comes through in the culture later.
Culture.
Yeah, it's culture
so last
and transparency.
Culture and transparency. I like that. So last question for you. I heard from you upending the status quo, driving healthier products and categories. Those are things that clearly resonated for me of what you were saying, how you found your passion and what was passionate driving for you. So as you think, if you were talking to someone and giving them advice on how to follow their passion, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be brutally honest with yourself, right? Like you really do. I mean, I think it's something you've done yourself, Michael. I mean, that's the work you did to get here, right? I mean, you have to sit down and you have to really go, what is it that's next for me? And do I like that? Or is that just me telling myself that this is what's next for me? Because this is soft. This is the easy path. This is naturally what's next if I just go with what I've been doing. Sometimes, doing that is really uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable. And getting out there, like it would have been the easiest thing in the world for me to do leaving Diageo to get into major big beer company or liquor company otherwise, or not start, our own business at Pour My Beer or, and go through 2 years of kind of hellish, startup growth and being sued by other companies. It was just, there's so many stories in there. I can't even begin. But basically it's about, you have to believe in it. You have to be 100% bought in yourself or it's going to fail because you're going to crack, before anybody else does. And you're going to say, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go back to the easy path. So you have to be convicted, first of all, and you have to believe it with pretty much every part of your being and then follow it. And it will happen. Like it will happen. It's just a case of work and time after that.
Well, I appreciate the uplifting note. We'll end it there. Thank you for being on, Declan. It's always great to see you.
You too, Michael. And I hope our next pint will be on Irish soil, and I'll get to do it with you over there.
I love it. Well, this is the Walk On Podcast, people leading with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your passion, walk on. Thanks again, Declan.
Thanks, Michael. Good luck.